Hey everyone, it's Sleepy Reader, aka Damien, and this is my comic book thoughts video, my reading diary, just throwing out whatever thoughts I have on stuff I've read, comic book stuff I've read. And it's been a while. I've been meaning to do this every week, but things got away from me. So it's just how it is. Recently, there's been a lot of sword and sorcery in my life. I guess in my reading life. The big thing for me was the Titan Conan book. I originally got this cover. I never double dip and buy multiple covers, or at least I can't remember the last time I did it. But I got this cover, and I love the comic so much. When I saw this was the only cover at the shop I originally got it at, and it's a good cover. But when I saw the Roberto della Torre cover, I had to get that. He is the interior artist. He did a fantastic job. I really feel like, the writing was good, but I really feel like it's the art that makes it work all together. You need a good script, but you really have a great comic when the artist is working full tilt. And yeah, it just was very visceral, very high energetic, and pulled you into this savage world of the past so fantastically well. Coloring was good too, although at times I had some of my issues where the color maybe didn't aid the eye finding the right part of the picture first, didn't aid the storytelling as much as made things look pretty. But that's a minor detail. I'll probably obsess about this a lot, so at the last of the comics that I do my dive inside of, I'll make Conan, so I'll spend a lot of time on that. And if you're not interested, you don't have to stick through to the end of the video. Jim Zub, the writer, did a good job, particularly bringing out the kind of details that make Conan feel right to us longtime Conan readers, people who've read Robert E. Howard and read lots of Roy Thomas Conan and others, no doubt. So yeah, that was nice. It's hard to tell with, it's going to be one of those stretched out stories over, who knows how many issues, probably 6. So it's hard to tell if this is going to be a great story or just a fun story with Conan done right. Either way, I'm pretty happy with it. I'm pretty psyched, and I'm back into that Conan mood. And I've been rereading some old Robert E. Howard. I went out and grabbed some other issues written by Jim Zub. They don't have as good artists on them, so I'm not sure. I started one of Jim Zub's stories when he was in the most recent Marvel incarnation of Conan, and I didn't immediately get into them, and I kind of dropped it. But this feels like the best Conan I've read in a long while, and especially because of the art. So also great art and good writing, and I'd say really good writing. I'd love to see Bill Willingham do Conan. I wonder if he's ever done that in the deep past. But the mature Bill Willingham writer on Conan would be very interesting. But Bill Willingham did a great job of bringing fire and ice into the world of comics. This is kind of a prequel to the movie. I got so excited by this comic, I rewatched the movie. It's still terrible and really hard to get through, even though it's got beautiful Frazetta-based visuals. So I put that on the foot or on the doorstep of Ralph Bakshi, that movie was kind of a flop. But Bill Willingham knows how to take all those elements and make a really tight story out of it. Like I said, a prequel. And I just love his pacing and his ability to give you a sense of character without hitting you over the head with it. And then the art was fantastic too by Leonardo Manco. I know I've seen his art somewhere before, but I'm not sure where. This is the cover C. Normally I try to collect all cover A's, but I seem to be broken of that habit. I did not like the cover A of the Conan, and I had to have the Frazetta cover, although I think there's a really good Bill Sienkiewicz cover for cover A. Anyway, so I'm really looking forward to this. I learned in an interview with Sarah Frazetta on Comics with Bueller's channel that they have 6 issues planned. So it'll be a fairly tight story, and I'm looking forward to see where that goes. Also sword and sorcery-ish, but from deep in the past, from 1983, is this mini-series called Edge of Chaos, written, drawn, colored, and lettered by Gray Morrow. I'm guessing no other letterer would be willing to cover up so much of Gray Morrow's art. He just goes on and on with the explanatory dialogue, and it's almost like you're just reading his synopsis, his ideas. So I suspect that Gray Morrow had an epic storyline in mind that he had to stuff into a 3-issue miniseries. So that's kind of unfortunate. And so often he's telling rather than showing, even though he's an artist. But I'm still looking forward to reading issues 2 and 3, which I have in my stack, just kind of pacing it out. And if nothing else, I really enjoy Gray Morrow's art. He's sort of a stealth favorite of mine, that you just don't find his work that often. Okay, then back into the present, I picked up this one-shot BRZRKR. Keanu Reeves is the creator of BRZRKR, but he was not the writer at all on this. It's all Steve Scroce who did the writing and the art. Colors by Dave Stewart. Really fun to look at book. A really fun, crazy, wacky sword and sorcery story. Kind of like the Conan stuff. It's part of a prehistory before recorded history that was wiped out by various disasters. And we get one of those disasters here in an epic battle between a giant monster and BRZRKR. I don't know how well it fits in with the Matt Kint version of BRZRKR, but it was just a really fun, wild romp. And I do have to say, though, it costs $10. It's a thicker than usual comic. I'm not sure how many pages, but if I had to guess, 40 maybe, a double-sized comic. 40, 45 pages. So whether that was worth $10, $9.99, I'm not sure. The funny thing is, when I don't go to the comic book store very often anymore, I don't look closely at the pricing of the books before I pick out a few. So I think I went in one week to pick this up and another week to pick up Conan. And unfortunately, when I go in, I end up then picking up some other new stuff. But that's why I'm trying not to have a pull list and go in every week and pick up stuff. I read a bunch of stories near the end of this omnibus out loud for a few nights with my daughter. I think it was 3 issues. It was a Gary Conway written, John Buscema drawn story where Thor and gang face off against the Black Stars. And the Black Stars are a group of planets. The whole thing was kind of a mishmash of ideas that didn't quite go anywhere. And to the degree that it was fun to read, it was because of the epic artwork of John Buscema. And definitely made me feel like it, especially in this Marvel method, a good artist can carry you a long way. But of course, the writer still has to bring you that last third that maybe makes the whole story make sense and be satisfying. And Gary Conway, who I think was a very young writer at the time, maybe just like 19 or something, to my mind was just thrashing about, throwing out an idea here, an idea there, but not being able to pull it all together. But still kind of silly fun to read. My daughter was kind of giggling at it as we read it. Here's the, we'll take a look inside. Here's the cover of the first issue, The 5 Planets of Death. At least on the cover they call them planets. So anyway, it's kind of, you read it now as an adult, or I read it now as an adult and wish there was more there. But still fun to read. Also fun to read and very different, even though it's science fiction, was Space Family Robinson Lost in Space. This is some kind of Whitman reprint of the Gold Key comic that must have come out, because it's copyright 1969, but it's got a price of 60 cents. And unfortunately, the story seems incomplete. There was a nice, complete Magnus robot fighter sort of time travel story at the back that was excellent. And there were lots of cool elements in the Lost in Space story, the Space Family Robinson story. This has nothing to do with the TV show Lost in Space. That's the whole thing. But they started the comic before the TV show came out. But it bears a lot of similarities. But in this one, they meet an alien and some medieval knights and villagers who've been frozen in time and they wake them up, and stuff ensues. It was interesting. It's told in a very flat style. And I've kind of been thinking lately about stuff that has good ideas, but you have to bring it to life in your head because it doesn't quite come to life on the page. And that's what this was kind of like. I'll take a look inside of this one for sure. Santos Sisters number 5 was a fun read. Nothing. They continue to be kind of consistent with their Santos Sisters pseudo Archie, pseudo other things, kind of undergroundy feeling comics. But it's very light and breezy, and it's starting to feel very much the same issue to issue, which is probably fine. I kind of in the back of my mind wonder, well, how many issues am I going to read before I kind of lose interest? And I'm not sure. Is it 10? Is it 15? Or will it be, if they just keep going and going, it'll probably be the kind of thing where I stop reading for a while and then I pick it up back again when I'm in the mood for that kind of light flutter of a story. It's very indie. It's sort of half self-published, half co-published with Floating World. It just says Floating World in small print at the bottom there. So it's very impressive that they've kept it going and that they're so consistent. I think because this was one, that I picked up because I was in the store for something else. I saw the Ribbon Queen. I must have seen someone talk about it online and thought it sounded kind of cool. Plus, it's Garth Ennis. It's Jason Burrows, who's done some interesting horror comics in the past. The art was very toned down, I thought, except for maybe the horrific last page or two. So that was nothing too exciting. And the story, as this variant cover, again, I accidentally get a variant cover, as this variant cover shows it to be, it's all a movie pitch. And it just follows a lot of familiar sort of movie cliches about police corruption and things like that. But it may take off in interesting directions because it only becomes a horror story in the last page or two. Or it may just continue to follow kind of a well-oiled groove of Hollywood formula. So I probably won't pick up future issues or maybe find them in cheap bins somewhere else down the road. But I'm slightly curious where it's going. Pink Elephant indulged, even though it doesn't look like your typical movie pitch comic, it indulges in all the cliches of horror movies with a group of young people going up to a cabin, doing a few stupid things like just dropping some random acid that they found in a box, and then some kind of bizarre killer is coming to get them. I did not buy into this one at all, unfortunately. I wanted to. I think that Pliskin wrote some other comics like Heavy Metal Drummer that I liked quite a bit, but I don't think I'll continue with this unless I hear really good things. My biggest disappointment of anything I read was Con and On. I picked it up basically because I loved Bad Ideas so much from the same publisher, and it looked like it was going to be a comedic comic. I remember work by Paul Cornell, quite a while ago that I liked, and I know that he writes in a lot of different fields. I think in script writing in England and prose novels and comics and other things. But this just seemed incredibly half-baked. I love the idea of different scenes that have a slight are connected to some degree by these two characters at the convention that takes place in like 1994 or something. And the next issue is going to be at a different convention. But everything seemed to be missing something. Everything in this book seemed to be like the writer had an idea in his head that he hadn't bothered to refine enough to communicate to the reader. So I just wanted to shout at this book. It's not worth spending a lot of time critiquing it, but this was really disappointing to me. Extremely enjoyable to me. This is probably another B cover or C cover. But it's Chris Samney. I couldn't resist the look of it. So what has happened to me? I'm not an A cover buyer anymore. This is The Last Days of Lex Luthor. Fantastic art by Brian Hitch. Excellent script by Mark Waid. There's one thing in here that I have a quibble with, but without that thing, they can't have the story at all, which is that Lex Luthor is dying of a cancer-like cellular degradation caused by one of his own experiments with kryptonite. And he basically forces Superman's hand to make Superman help him find a cure. But if you thought about it, that would mean Superman should be trying to find a cure for cancer for everybody and for liver disease and every other kind of slow death kind of thing that happens to people, either because of their bad luck or their foolish behavior. And the Superman we know doesn't do that. But anyway, it makes for a great story anyway. But it's funny how much my brain picks at that. But so we'll definitely take a look in here and maybe spoil it a little bit more. I picked, in the sort of sword and sorcery vein, although this is prehistoric, I couldn't resist this cover when I walked into some comic book shop. I guess this is the June issue of Shudder. This is a reprint. All of their covers, I think, are reprints, or most of them. Definitely when it's Frazetta, since obviously he's not alive anymore. So this is a beautiful Frazetta. I almost wonder if it's like a detail of a larger painting. I don't really recall this painting from before, but it really spoke to me in the store. What is it about two naked people out in the wilderness fighting giant lizards? I don't know. But the interior work was so-so to actually bad. But there was two stories in here worth mentioning, and I'll talk about them when I flip things around. I'm not going to talk about it this time around because I plan to do a video more. I read the first volume of Storm, and I'm halfway through the second volume of Storm. Those European comics that you may have seen me unbox in my last video. And I've also been slowly working through the Trigon Empire, which is by the same artist, Don Lawrence, his British series that made him kind of famous in the rest of Europe, which led to him doing the Storm comics. I don't know if I'm going to worry about finishing this comic before I do a video on Storm, but I'll talk about what I have read in the Trigon Empire at the same time. So I'm enjoying both of those. Trigon Empire less so, but I'm loving Storm, but I'll talk more about that later. So I'll move the camera and be right back with a look inside of everything. I don't think I'll look inside every comic, ones that weren't maybe not worth going into and making the video over long. Just wanted to show you quickly, because I don't really recommend Pink Elephant, and I didn't love all the art, but the artist does come alive when things really get weird. Here's where they find the random acid and start putting it in their mouths. I thought this scene was kind of cool. And then they start tripping, and the psycho killer shows up looking like a pink elephant. So I think that's all you need to know about the Pink Elephant comic. And you don't need to know a whole lot about Shudder, but there are two comics in here that I particularly wanted to show you. The first one, actually, this is also a good artist, but the story was very silly. Basically just a swimming pool run by vampires. So they trap people, and then a priest fools them with a different kind of water. This one that is based on the cover, the artist here, who I think normally draws closer to John Buscema, actually, but has always had some elements of Kubert, draws this one like early Joe Kubert Thor comics, in my opinion. The Joe Kubert's creator-owned Caveman comic, which saw many different iterations, and I feel like I've seen versions of Thor that looked a lot like this. Every story in Shudder has to have a twist. The twist here is kind of on the sex roles and which of these two people is the braver one. So that's that. And then this story was totally meh, not much going on. The art was okay. This one fascinated me because I love Abbott and Costello. And this has characters, not with the names Abbott and Costello, but very close, who look identical to Abbott and Costello. And the mummy looks exactly like, not Lon Chaney Jr., who played the mummy? Boris Karloff. The mummy looks exactly like Boris Karloff from the Mummy movies. So this, if the writing were better, this could be a wonderful, a little sequel or little play on Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy, which was a movie that I love. So anyway, I enjoyed this. I enjoy going back and looking at it. So I thought I'd look at it with you guys. I'm going to spoil the end. The end, the mummy chases them out of the museum because he wants peace and quiet so he can read his comic books, his Egyptian hieroglyphic comic books. Better twist end than most of the things in Shudder. I've picked up a lot of magazines from Warrant Publishing. This one has another mediocre twist end, but it does have really, this story has really cool art now that I think of it. Kind of makes me think of something in the 2001 AD vein, actually. But so I personally, I don't know if everyone else feels the same way, but once they started publishing two magazines, I felt like their good artists were spread more thin, and maybe it's hard for me to say for sure, but maybe the twist endings got even less impressive, if that's possible, when there was just one magazine that they're publishing, because they published Shudder and they published the Vampirus, what's it called, the Vampirus Carmilla. But they're almost identical magazines other than having a different host. I don't think they have Carmilla Adventures or anything like that. As I said, I loved this last days of Lex Luthor. I guess I'll spoil a little bit of this issue. This is a very evil version of Lex. It's not like a light, funny version, because some of this evokes kind of a Silver Age Superman and Lex Luthor. But no, this is a very, very evil, vicious, sociopathic Lex Luthor who'd happily kill millions of people, I think. But color was great. Who's the colors? Colors is not one I was familiar with. The inks are by Kevin Nolan over Brian Hitch's pencils, and the colors are by David Barron. Not sure if I've seen his colors before. I probably have. But his colors mix very well with Brian Hitch's work. And it reminds me, who was the colorist on Authority? It wasn't David Barron, was it? It was Laura Dupay, was that it? It reminds me of her coloring style. So anyway, after a lot of embarrassment for poor Superman having to help Lex Luthor, we also get some interesting flashbacks. This is a version where Lex lived in Smallville, but I don't think Clark was Superboy. I think Clark just had superpowers but wasn't allowed to use them by his parents. So we get an interesting backstory on Lex and Superboy, or Lex and Clark, and a vision of what the high school years, childhood years were like for Clark, having to keep his powers covered up and not share with anybody. And Lex was almost the person, had things been slightly different, that he could have shared things with. But now he's taking the totally selfish, evil Lex to the Fortress of Solitude, which surprised me, but it made a kind of sense because he wants to bring him to Kandor, hoping that Kandorian science can find the cure to his problem. But they can't. And the next phase is he decides, because Lex's cells are rapidly deteriorating and even freezing won't stop the deterioration, he decides to store Lex in the Phantom Zone, but that doesn't go so well, and the interesting stuff happens there. Every version of the Phantom Zone feels different to me. Sometimes I feel kind of frustrated that there isn't just an accepted, this is what the Phantom Zone is and this is how it works. But still, this version of the Phantom Zone was interesting. My biggest objection or disappointment was that Kryptonians in the Phantom Zone and in the city, in Kandor, are all portrayed as all wearing the exact same outfits. And I don't understand why they decided to go with that. It would have been so much more fun to do all that kind of retro futuristic outfits that Kandorians usually, or that Kryptonians usually wore. The only one with a slightly interesting outfit is this like chief medical scientist. So I'm interested. I'm really interested to see where this goes next. I think it's just 3 issues. Like most of these, this is another one of those oversized books. Like most of these oversized Black Label books. And I don't know what it makes it Black Label. But just as adult things happen in the regular comics, but maybe just because it's a Elseworlds of sorts. Superman has a wedding ring on here. I didn't look to see. I don't think he has a wedding ring in the comic, so he's not married to Lois whenever this story takes place. I'll give you a quick look inside the Lost in Space. I was sort of talking about how the storytelling itself is very stiff. There's not a lot of personality to it, but the ideas, the science fiction in the story kind of charmed me. And there is kind of a goofy fun of like they send the children out on scouting missions on an unknown planet, which is kind of funny. But they don't have much personality, and just the whole narrative style doesn't have much personality. But as it gets going, it's kind of intriguing. But then it as best I can tell, they don't even say to be continued. As best I can tell, the story's not quite over. Is it possible that Whitman just skipped a page or two, or was there a whole nother issue here? Because it ends with the alien is on his deathbed or is sick, and we don't know if he's going to die. And if he dies, he can't help them find their way back to Earth. But then that's it. Where does space begin? They have a Space Fact article, and then they have this cool. I assume this is drawn by Russ Manning. And did Russ Manning sometimes write these too? It's a short, maybe 6-page story where Leisha and Magnus, the robot fighter, go on a little tour of the past, and something goes wrong, and they get flung into the far future of their future, and face a desolate Earth ruled over by one gigantic robot, which of course they defeat, and within a few panels return back happily to their own time. He'll quack you up in Whitman Comics. So that's fun. I have a bunch of Space Family Robinson, and I've only read a few of them, so I need to search through them and figure out if I have another version of this story, if there is a page missing. Love the painted covers. I'm not sure, was this George somebody who painted the covers? No, I can't remember. Let me show you a little bit of that John Buscema Thor. So if you were just to look at the pictures and maybe read a few words, you would just think this is a super awesome, epic scale story where the galaxy's in trouble, the colonizers are all fleeing their planet, the colonizers' planet gets destroyed. There's the planet being destroyed. This was apparently during the period where they didn't want to pay as much, so they instructed the artists in every issue had to do a 2-page thing on a 1-page piece of paper and get paid for just 1 page. So, and Jerry Conway in his introduction, in the text introduction, talks about that and how Buscema found such interesting things to do with that fact. So there's something called the Black Stars that are attacking. These are the Black Stars. These are actually 5 planets that are somehow just stationary around a smaller star in the middle, and the galaxy consumer. And so Thor and adventurers, just a small handful of them, go to try to solve this problem. And they face a series of characters. This robot character that they fight with, but then become friends with. And then they have to fight this other character, the Protector, who's a giant robot protecting the planets. And then when they arrive on one of the Black Star planets, one of the planets called the Black Star, they discover that the inhabitants of those planets are giants. This is the side down there, the tiny little characters, tiny little creatures like fleas, like insects, are the Asgardians and the giant robot that they were with. But it's never developed very well. There's a creepy scene where Thor is actually in the hairs on this guy's hand. It's just never, I don't know. It looks so cool as I'm flipping through it. So that's why I feel it's mostly probably things created by John Buscema that then Jerry Conway didn't quite make work. So yeah, those were the 3 issues we read together. I think my daughter's kind of lost interest, at least for the moment, but I may continue on, or I may go back to the beginning of this trade and start there, of this omnibus. I think the entire omnibus is the Gary Conway run on Thor. And thankfully, almost all of it was with John Buscema, and John Buscema at a peak. This looks like another one of those pages that was done on a smaller piece of paper and enlarged. I'm not sure if that's correct, but anyway, fun stuff. Wish I was kind of ranting about Jerry Conway. I do think Jerry Conway was not nearly as good as some of the other writers who continued Stan Lee's legacy. Roy Thomas being the best of them in my mind. But maybe I'm being unfair to him. He's done a few classic things, especially with Spider-Man. Here's the BRZRKR one-shot, Poetry of Madness. Be warned, there's going to be a lot of gore in here. Although there's a lot of gore on the cover, but I think it gets worse. But it's also just visually glorious. And it's got that almost kind of predictable color palette that you get from Dave Stewart, but it works really well. We get to see the BRZRKR just in his godlike elegance absolutely decimate an army, hack an army to pieces. And in fact, it's hard to have a lot of sympathy with him, really, even though this army is all horrible people who want to destroy a city. This city that he's kind of the god of this city. Is it Atlantis or Lemuria? I can't quite remember. It'd be interesting if they ended up with a TV show about BRZRKR instead of a movie. Then they could have every episode be part in the modern times and part a flashback to a different life that he led in different places, and that would be a lot of fun. So some priests rebel against his godhood, and they call up Cthulhu. They actually call it Cthulhu. They call up Cthulhu, and then the BRZRKR has an epic battle against Cthulhu. And I believe the end result is that Atlantis gets destroyed. So that's kind of fun, connecting these different sort of fictional, mythological things all in one. But, it was done in a very simplistic way. But it also had a very nice narration from this character who's kind of a disciple or priestess of BRZRKR. So anyway, fun comic. Probably should hurry things up. Edge of Chaos has a plot where basically sometime in the past of Earth, there are these godlike aliens who've been mistaken for mostly for the Greek gods, but they are trapped on Earth unless they can undo the evil of one of their members. So they call back someone named Heracles, aka Hercules, I guess. Heracles. This is Heracles. They call him through time, back through time. He's from our modern time, and turn him into an overly muscular guy, because I guess they can't do their own fighting, and they want him to go fight their person Mulak, because until they get Mulak to stop misbehaving, their alien race won't let them leave Earth, the rest of their super civilized alien race. So it's kind of, even though there's a lot of talking to set all this up, it's kind of vague what they expect him to do exactly. But he does go off with a goddess companion. I think she's like Athena. And there's plenty of toplessness in this for those of you who like toplessness. Because Athena has magic powers. She made this guy's nose get... I guess she can give them illusions. Is she Athena? I can't remember now. She doesn't have the exact same name. And at the end of this comic, he gains some companions who seem to be different evolutionary branches of primates that are still around. He makes it pass at the goddess, but she says no way. So anyway, that's really cool. There is a backup story which I haven't read yet. The art here looks pretty good too. Story by Lomax. So this is really at the beginning of the 80s wave of independent comics. I think Captain Victory had just gotten going. They had Twisted Tales going, Silver Star, some Elric, Gru had just gotten going. So yeah, this is kind of an interesting period where they were trying out some stuff, and it probably was Gray Morrow putting a whole bunch of ideas that he'd been holding back on until he had, a creator-owned comic to do. And I think there does exist somewhere an oversized trade of this material. Fire and Ice, good writing, good art, as I've said. And the art evokes a bit of a Frank Frazetta feel without being a labored copy of Frank Frazetta. This kind of also even evokes the kind of composition Frank Frazetta might do, although a little bit different. And the coloring's really nice. I guess the artist Manco did the coloring too, so he did an excellent job on the coloring. And so we have kind of bringing the threads of some various stories together. You don't need to have watched the movie to enjoy this. I suppose the movie would give you some sense of that who are going to be the important characters in the movie later on, but the movie itself is so bad that this outshines it by a long shot. So I do feel like it's the kind of thing that probably will read best when you have all 6 issues. But still, I'm going to get it in the individual issues. Okay, to my central piece, the Conan. Let's see, I can just look through this one. So the setup here, we are they let us know exactly where in Conan's history this is. I think he's age 24 or 23. He was in the big battle, as his first battle as a teenager. Was it 8 years ago or 6 years ago? Anyway, they place us here, and we jump into he's at the end of some adventure, some battle or war that he was in, and he did not like the way the leader of the mercenary band that he's part of behaved in that, leading to some people's deaths. So he's beating the guy up at a bar and giving his resignation. The art is just really pleasurable to me. There is one topless woman tucked away here, but then she doesn't show up again. We get another character who I guess the tavern wench, who is also a bit of a prostitute. And but she is portrayed kind of in a cool way, where she seems kind of curious about Conan, and Conan is kind of you know, warming up to her slowly, I guess, and saying, maybe we could, maybe, you know, she says, I'm certain I could make you smile, my friend. And he says, I'm sure you could. Let's have a few drinks and see what happens. But that's when they get interrupted and the action happens. I don't know. I just liked the way they handled that very well. It's weird that, see this picture here? I feel like I've seen that somewhere. So here's the question. There's so much of it looks like John Buscema. I almost wondered at times, as I was reading this, I was kept trying to think, is he actually lifting different bits of John Buscema directly into new compositions? And I don't think so. And I think there's actually, if you dig deeper, there's kind of a touch of Frank Frazetta art, or some of the sort of slinkiness in some of the compositions have a Frank Frazetta kind of feel. And I also, deep in the background, kind of got a Rudy Nebres feeling from some of the compositions and the way things move. So I think, although De La Torre has absorbed a huge amount of John Buscema, and maybe he's leaning into it here. I don't know how he's drawn in other comics, although I was looking back, and I think I have read other comics by him a long time ago. But I think he's pulling in other influences. He may also be pulling in a Hal Foster, Prince Valiant influence, although that's hard to pull out because Hal Foster was a huge influence on John Buscema also. This is an example for me of the kind of picture where the coloring isn't really helping us much, even though it looks very pretty. And also I couldn't, this guy's still fighting, but he's got like bones sticking out of his arm and stuff. I would think you would faint at that point, but that's comic books, right? But it's hard to tell who's fighting and what's going on. We do throughout have hints. There's an army of zombies, essentially, what seems to be an army of zombies. And behind them are these guys in hoods with glowing eyes. So clearly they will be an important part of the plot and what's going on here. And clearly, I'm guessing, to stop the army of zombies, you'll have to kill their controllers. So another, as I said, I love this. I do have kind of a question mark about, how good the story is going to be overall. But I love all the details. We'll just see whether this army of zombies turns into that interesting of a story. Some of the best Conan stories aren't just about Conan, but about other characters who Conan passes through their lives, and about cultures. But one thing I noticed is everyone's clothes look a little bit too much the same. And maybe that's partially the fault of the coloring, but they all kind of look like rags. I mean, I suppose you could say Conan's clothes are different than this guy's clothes. But it just didn't evoke enough for me. So this is me being really picky because I love Conan so much. The sense of different cultures clashing. I guess here you have some guys with some metal helmets. I'm surprised that on the edge of the Aquilonia border there aren't some sort of people dressed in knights or in armor or mail and fancier garb. Everyone seems to kind of be dressed in rags. So I don't know. But maybe as this series continues, and I pray that De La Torre stays on it for a long time, we'll see them explore different cultures, and we'll see how they handle that. Because you got different clothes, different architecture to play with, and different landscapes, of course. I feel like there's something more I want to say, but anyway, this got me I kept puzzling over, is this how much, that looks exactly like a John Buscema Conan right there. How much is it really like John Buscema? Here is John Buscema's very first issue of Conan, inked by his brother Sal Buscema. And So we have kind of a fight scene here versus a fight scene there. And Della Torre can do the kind of thing where he shows blow by blow what's happening in the fight. I really like this here. But John Buscema does it all the time. Every single action is clear. And some of these other things are by Della Torre are more like a modern comic where we've kind of skipped over a lot of actions and we're just seeing the end result perhaps here. And then we're in a completely different set of action scenes in almost every panel. There's the people with the glowing eyes again. So yeah, that was one thought in terms of Buscema versus, and here you can see Buscema. This is, there's many versions of Buscema too, depending on who's inking him, when he was working, how fast he was working that month. But Buscema kind of is more literal. There's less, and this is maybe where this seems more Frank Frazetta-ish to me. Let's see. I've got a Frank Frazetta book here. This is going to get clumsy. Here's a huge Frank Frazetta book I have, and I put some bookmarks. Here's a very slinky Frank Frazetta. This was a cover, I think, to Famous Funnies, but you can sort of see the way everyone's moving, and that kind of, some of these scenes reminded me of that a little bit. I mean, I'm kind of stretching because I don't want Della Torre to simply be, and here's other kind of slinky Frazetta stuff, and also the compositions with sort of the group of things coming towards one character is something very much from Frazetta. Here's some other covers by Frazetta, which again have that, what I'm calling that slinky look to the way the figures move. Man, I want to read a comic that is just all about this story. Here's a painting which also has that kind of cluster composition and the slinky figures. I'm just enjoying Frazetta. This was one of my favorite Frazetta paintings as a kid. I mean, it's just crazy, this guy attacking a mammoth head on, but that slinky, sexy, violent kind of vibe. And it's interesting to see the drawing Frazetta did at first, which looks a bit more like Buscema and Del Torre when you see the drawings versus the paintings. Here's one of his most famous Conan covers, again with that composition, that composition that kind of goes up towards the main figure. So there's a few more. Yeah, the Mucker, again, with that composition and that kind of flow of action. Let's see, what else did I... Oh, and here's another, to me, very famous Conan cover from Conan the Conqueror and from a Molly Hatchet album. Yeah, so I just sensed a little bit of this stuff in Della Torre's approach, and that makes me very excited. But it would be nice if he and he's better than other modern comic book artists, but if he and other modern comic artists took more of this approach. Let's see, in another volume I was looking at this page, which I guess because I equated it with this misty fight with the zombie horde. This kind of, now of course the coloring is completely different too, but I think Della Torre has taken the Conan look from Buscema, but he's doing something else with it. But there is not, that continuity is just not quite as clear. The story, the visual storytelling that Buscema does. I wish we could see more of that. So, and I just kept looking at more and more Buscema stuff. There's a bunch of Buscema covers inked by Buscema, so that's kind of a pure Buscema. It's not in the picture. I'm sorry. Did you guys see these two covers? It's not like Buscema has a lot of physical action and movement to his things. It's a little bit less, I don't know, lithe or something. And maybe I'm wrong. This is a really great action scene. And it's, maybe it's arguable in my mind. Like, this is better in a way because you really know what's going on. Here you have to, and maybe it's the color's fault, you have to kind of think a bit. Okay, he's whacked two guys with a shield, and what has he done with his sword there? Maybe swiped at this guy too? I don't know. So they're not identical. This one has more of that look. And I do love seeing Buscema inking himself and in color here. This is really nice. The coloring gives things a different vibe, but it is a kind of brutal world that Buscema portrays. I'm just just enjoying these Buscema covers. I guess I imagined I would think of something to say in comparison to the two, but I just enjoy it. Yeah, so there's that pluses and minuses between the two artists, and there are differences. Let's see. Oh, here I had some examples of the movement that this is Rudy Nebres drawing and inking himself. He has a very overpowering inking style, so that can be kind of distracting. It's different from De La Torre's inking style, which is closer to Buscema. But that sense of movement, and I don't know, as something I sort of see a similarity between the two. Now, Nebres has put a lot more work than anyone else would put into the drawing, but that's just amazing. So, an underappreciated artist, although I know there are people like me who realize how great he was. What have I gotten here that I thought was of interest? I guess I didn't. Just more Nebres, if that's the proper pronunciation of his name. So I don't know if you feel the same way as I do, that you can see some kind of connection there to the Nebres and the De La Torre. Way more panels per page. Even this is one of the most heavily paneled pages, but even so, there's more. Let's see. This kind of thing to that kind of thing, I guess, is part of what I'm thinking. Finally, I have this really cool Big John Buscema catalog, essentially, but it's a book-long essay about Buscema's development as an artist, with lots and lots of great original Buscema art, portrayed in here too. This is a fantastic piece. I think it's one of those frontispieces. This is from Marvel Comics Super Special, one of those frontispieces. Here's kind of, I suppose, a similar Conan to Conan in the bar scene here. We got Conan here within the crowded bar. It's a more fun picture than this bar. But I suppose there's a genericness to people's clothing too. I don't know. I like the way Buscema shows stitches and whatnot there. We got barmaids who aren't so good looking, fat people, thin people. I'm not sure what this is from. I think this is 1984. It's later Buscema artwork in terms of Conan. There's the classic Buscema Conan face. Let's see if I can find one of those faces in here. And they, for some reason, give us all these different Conan eyes here. Or I think they're all mostly Conan. There we go. Something like that to that. It's possible, that there are moments in here that are traced, bits and pieces. But like the body shape is a little different too. Like Delatorre likes to do that thing with the shoulders, like kind of the way a bodybuilder sort of sometimes overbuilds up their shoulder muscles. I thought there was going to be another even better example of that Buscema Conan face. But anyway, it's kind of cool. I assume this book is out of print now. It was published by IDW. I definitely bought it, at a discount online when it came out. Anyway, my wife is texting me, so it's probably time for me to say goodbye. Thank you so much for joining me for this long video, and I hope some Conan fans manage to jump in here. Here's another kind of fight scene that reminds me of the fight scene at the beginning of this comic book. I have to go pick up my daughter from a birthday party, and my wife is asking me when dinner's going to be. So life goes on.
Sam.